Her sleeve slipped, revealing bruises she tried to hide. The CEO's eyes froze, not in pity, but calculation. Within seconds, Dwight Hardy realized his spotless empire was sheltering something dark, and someone was about to pay. But when he ordered her to show the truth, he had no idea it would lead to the collapse of everything he built. HI family, welcome back. If you're ready for this thrilling story that I am about to share, like this video and hit the subscribe button. Share with friends because support like this helps us to bring more amazing videos like this. She mumbled something about being clumsy, reaching for her cleaning rag like it could erase the evidence. But Dwight Hardy, CEO of Hardy Tech Industries, wasn't the kind of man who missed details. He noticed everything: stock fluctuations, boardroom betrayals, and now, fear, hidden beneath a sleeve. What Laura Hurst didn't know was that, in that moment, the most powerful man in the building had just made a quiet promise to himself. He'd find out who made her afraid. It was 6:52 a.m. The city below still shimmered with early light, and Dwight sat in his corner office overlooking the skyline, a man built from precision. Reports stacked neatly, his routine timed to the minute. He didn't believe in chance. Everything had a pattern, a cause, a reason. So when the janitor, who always moved like background noise, flinched under his gaze, he knew something was wrong. In his world, weakness was currency. You exploited it or it destroyed you. But something about Laura's quiet dignity unsettled him. She wasn't weak. She was surviving. He watched her approach the desk again, methodical and graceful despite the tremor in her hands. She placed down his fresh cup of coffee, both hands steady at first, until her sleeve slipped again. Bruises. Not just one. Rings of faded yellow, some deep purple, others shaped like fingerprints. It took everything in him not to react. "Ms. Hurst," he said, voice calm, eyes steady. "Did someone hurt you?" "No, sir," she whispered. "Just an accident." But accidents didn't leave marks like ownership. Both arms. "I said it's nothing, Mr. Hardy." "Then show me your nothing." She froze. His tone wasn't harsh, it was absolute. She slowly rolled up her sleeves. The bruises told the story her voice couldn't. Dwight leaned back in his chair, studying the woman in front of him. She was composed but haunted. A quiet kind of strength that didn't ask for pity, only peace. He said nothing for a long time. Then quietly, "You work in my building, under my roof. That means you don't walk through these halls in fear. Do you understand me?" She nodded, eyes wet but defiant. When she left, Dwight stared at the door she'd closed behind her. Somewhere beneath his calm exterior something shifted, a kind of moral alarm. He reached for his intercom. "Helen, pull the janitorial contract for the night staff. Especially Laura Hurst. I want everything. Background checks, employment records, references." A pause. Then softer, almost to himself. "Someone hurt that woman. And I intend to find out who." Outside his window, dawn spilled over the glass towers of Hardy Tech. Clean, perfect, and utterly blind to the bruises hiding within it. That morning became the crack in Hardy Tech's perfect glass image, and the beginning of a redemption neither of them saw coming. Laura Hurst finished her shift just as the city began to hum awake. She rode the elevator down with her cleaning cart, eyes lowered, the weight of fatigue pressing on her shoulders. The uniform she wore was too big, sleeves covering her wrists. Every jolt of the elevator made her wince. At the ground floor, she pushed her cart into the storage room, clocked out, and stepped into the cold morning air. Her phone buzzed, an unknown number. She didn't answer. She already knew who it was. She walked faster, crossing the street toward the bus stop. Behind her, a dark sedan idled too long before pulling away. She didn't look back. She never did. The city was loud, indifferent. Steam rose from manholes, people passed by, and no one noticed the woman hugging her coat tighter as she hurried home. She lived 3 bus rides away, in a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. The walls were thin, the air smelled like detergent, and the silence was never quite empty. She dropped her keys on the counter, sank into a chair, and let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her arm throbbed. She unrolled her sleeve and traced the bruises with her fingertips. purple shadows that told the story she refused to speak. The phone buzzed again. This time she read the message. "You think you're safe there? Don't forget who gave you that job." Her stomach twisted. Evan. She deleted the message, turned the phone face down, and stared at the small clock on the wall. Only a few hours before she'd have to go back. Before she'd have to see Dwight Hardy again and pretend nothing had happened. But this time felt different. The way he'd looked at her. Calm, unblinking, not out of pity but something else. Determination. Maybe even anger. No one had ever looked at her that way before. She moved to the window, parting the curtain slightly. The street below was quiet. No sedan. No shadows. But she knew better than to believe peace when it came too easily. Her mind replayed his words. "You work in my building under my roof. That means you don't walk through these halls in fear." If only he knew how far the fear went. She turned back toward the small table by her couch. Papers were spread across it. Old pay stubs, cleaning schedules, half-burned candles. And next to them, a folder she shouldn't have had, a printout from Hardy Tech's internal network. She shouldn't have seen it, shouldn't have copied it. But she had. She'd overheard things in the data lab. Conversations about encrypted transfers, off-the-record access points, and a name she never wanted to hear again. Evan Cross. He was back. Not in person yet, but in the system. His digital fingerprints were everywhere. She looked at the bruises again, then at the folder. Fear wasn't the only thing burning inside her anymore. That morning had changed something for both of them. Dwight Hardy didn't know it yet, but the janitor he'd noticed for the first time was about to become the only person who could save his company, and herself from what was coming next. Laura Hurst didn't sleep that day. She sat on the edge of her bed, the blinds drawn, the soft hum of the city outside doing little to calm her. The message from Evan still burned behind her eyelids. "You think you're safe there? Don't forget who gave you that job." Her stomach twisted every time she read those words. She hadn't wanted this job because of him. She'd taken it to escape him. But somehow, even from the corners of her new life, he'd managed to find her again. The room was small, the air faintly metallic from the old radiator. On the dresser sat a half-empty bottle of lotion, a chipped photo frame, and her badge, Hardy Tech Janitorial Staff, Night Shift. She stared at her name printed beneath the company logo, her reflection ghosted in the laminate plastic. She whispered to herself, "No one knows, Laura. Keep it that way." For a while she just sat there, her hands wrapped around a mug of cold coffee, staring at nothing. Then, with a sigh, she stood and moved to the mirror. Pulling back her sleeve, she examined the bruises. They were healing slower this time. His grip had been harder. She dabbed concealer over them until the marks blurred into her skin. When she looked up again, she saw not the janitor Hardy Tech ignored, but the woman who'd survived him once before. The doorbell buzzed sharply. She froze, heart pounding, before realizing it was only the mail carrier. A few envelopes slid under the door. Bills. Junk. One unmarked envelope. She hesitated, then tore it open. Inside was a folded napkin. Written across it in blue pen. "Still cleaning up after me, sweetheart?" Her breath caught. She pressed the paper flat on the counter. No signature. But she didn't need one. Evan Cross had found her apartment. She sank into the chair, gripping the edge until her knuckles whitened. There was a time when he'd been charming, when she'd believed his promises, his soft voice, the way he made her feel seen. He'd been a security analyst at Hardy Tech back then, ambitious and confident, the kind of man who drew people in. He taught her to trust him, and when she finally did, he taught her to regret it. The first bruise had come a year into their relationship. The first threat a few months later. By the time she left, he'd taken everything but her name. And now he wanted that too. She tore the napkin in half, then again, and flushed it down the toilet. She couldn't go to the police. She already had. They'd said the same thing twice. No proof. So she did what she always did. She went to work. By the time she arrived at Hardy Tech that evening, the building gleamed with the quiet efficiency of a place that ran on money and fear. She clocked in at 7:03 p.m. sharp. The night crew was small, 2 janitors, 1 supervisor, but she preferred it that way. Less noise, fewer eyes. The lobby lights reflected off glass and steel, and her sneakers squeaked faintly against the polished floor. She moved through the empty hallways with practiced rhythm. Vacuum, dust, repeat. It was easier to stay invisible when no one was watching. Yet tonight, she couldn't shake the weight of Dwight Hardy's gaze from that morning. He'd looked at her like she was more than a shadow. Like he'd actually seen her. She told herself it didn't matter. People noticed, then forgot. That's how the world worked. Still, a small part of her wondered if maybe this time would be different. By the time she reached the 22nd floor, the research division, the building was quiet except for the low hum of the HVAC. She pushed her cart into the data lab, flicking on the lights. The air smelled faintly of burnt dust and coffee. Rows of monitors glowed in standby mode, screens filled with code she didn't understand. She worked in silence, humming softly to steady her nerves. The rhythmic swish of the mop was almost comforting. She had just finished the first aisle when voices drifted from the corridor. Men's voices. She froze. The lab should have been empty. Security didn't make rounds here until midnight. She quickly switched off her light and crouched behind one of the work tables. The door slid open. "Told you he'd want the files by tomorrow," a low voice said. "The client's getting impatient." A second voice replied, sharp, agitated. "Yeah, well, we're not supposed to touch that server anymore. Hardy's already paranoid. The last breach nearly cost us a contract." Laura's pulse quickened. She could see the faint outlines of 2 men in security uniforms through the reflection on the glass cabinet. "Relax," the first man said. "He won't know. We'll push the transfer through the old VPN, same as last time." There was a short silence. Then one name cut through the static like a blade. "Cross says the client's willing to pay double for this batch." Laura's hand flew to her mouth before she could stop herself. "Evan." The sound of a phone buzzing filled the room. "You heard from him directly?" "Yeah. He's off-site, but he's watching. Said he'll handle anyone who gets nosy." She ducked lower, her breath shallow. They were talking about company files, illegal transfers, espionage. And Evan was still part of it. Still inside the system. The first man sighed. "We finished tonight, it's done. No loose ends." "What about the janitor?" "What about her?" "She's got access. Some of the badge logs came up under her ID last week." A pause. "Then maybe she's the loose end." Laura's body went cold. Footsteps moved closer to where she hid. The glow of a flashlight swept across the room, landing just inches from her face. She stayed still, praying her heart didn't give her away. After what felt like forever, the light moved off again. The men left, their conversation fading down the hall. She didn't move for several minutes. When she finally stood, her knees shook. The lab was silent again. But something inside her had shifted. She walked to one of the active terminals. On the monitor, a set of access logs flashed across the screen. Strings of numbers and names she didn't fully understand. But there it was, employee ID 309, Hurst, L. Next to a series of unauthorized data extractions. They'd used her ID. Her fingers trembled as she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. She plugged it in and copied the logs. She didn't know what she'd do with them yet, but instinct told her to hold on to proof, real proof. When the transfer finished, she slipped the drive into her sleeve and unplugged it just as the lab door hissed open again. Laura. Her heart leapt. It was only Miguel, one of the other janitors. He peered inside, yawning. "You're still up here? Shift's almost over." She nodded quickly. "Yeah. Just finishing up." He grinned. "You work too hard, Hurst." He waved and left. She waited until his footsteps disappeared before exhaling. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark computer screen. Tired, scared, but sharper somehow. He was still in her life, poisoning it from the shadows. But she wasn't the same woman who'd run from him last time. She touched the flash drive hidden beneath her sleeve. "You used me to hide your crimes," she whispered. "Let's see how you hide when I turn the lights on." Outside, the skyline gleamed through the tall windows, and far below, the city carried on, indifferent, busy, unaware that in a silent data lab, a janitor had just taken the first step toward blowing open a conspiracy that reached the top floors of Hardy Tech itself. She gathered her things, locked the lab behind her, and walked down the corridor with a steady, determined stride. The bruises still ached, but for the first time, they didn't feel like marks of shame. They felt like warnings carved into her skin, reminders that fear had a limit, and she'd finally reached hers. Laura stepped into the elevator, pressed the button for the lobby, and watched the doors slide shut. Her reflection glimmered in the mirrored walls. The woman looking back wasn't invisible anymore. Laura moved differently now. Still quiet, still invisible, but with purpose. Each night she clocked in with a plan, her eyes scanning every corridor, her ears tuned to whispers people thought she couldn't hear. She began collecting things no one would miss. USB drives half-tucked under keyboards. Memos tossed into recycling bins. Shredded paper fragments she'd sweep into her cart, then reassemble back home like pieces of a puzzle. At first, it was just instinct. Something to occupy the anxiety that never left her. But the more she found, the clearer the pattern became. Hardy Tech was leaking. On her third night of searching, she found a discarded printout in a trash bin behind the IT office. Rows of numbers. Login timestamps. Names of client companies she recognized. Fortune-class accounts Hardy Tech had sworn were secure. At the bottom of the page, a string of characters caught her eye. ID 309 _Hurst L. Her badge. She sat down hard on a stool, the papers shaking in her hands. They were still doing it, using her access to move stolen data. She folded the document, slipped it into her uniform pocket, and forced herself to keep working. The surveillance cameras blinked red above her. She smiled for them, calm and compliant. She had learned long ago that survival depended on how well you could look harmless. When her shift ended at dawn, she didn't go home. Instead, she slipped into the locker room, shut the door, and pulled out her old laptop from the bottom of her locker. The casing was cracked, the fan too loud, but it worked. She plugged in the flash drive she'd copied from the data lab, added the file she'd gathered, and started sorting through lines of code she barely understood. It didn't matter that she wasn't an engineer. Evan had taught her enough when they were together. How to track simple data paths, how to recognize an encrypted tag. Back then, he'd called it fun, making her feel clever while he used her curiosity to control her. Now she was using what he'd taught her to dismantle the trap he'd built. Hours passed. The hum of servers in the next room filled the silence. Slowly, a map began to form on her screen. File transfers routed through dummy VPNs, rerouted again through unregistered terminals. Every path led to one destination. A server registered under cross-security solutions. Her throat tightened. Evan's new company. The realization hit her like a cold wind. This wasn't just blackmail or petty revenge. He was selling Hardy Tech as data, using her ID as the perfect camouflage. If the system flagged the breach, she'd be the first name on the report. Her phone buzzed on the metal bench. Another message. No name, just a line. You're welcome for the promotion, sweetheart. Her grip tightened on the phone. She wanted to throw it, scream, run, but she didn't. Instead, she typed one line back. You made a mistake this time. Then she turned the phone off and shoved it into her pocket. By the time she left the building, sunlight was spilling across the skyline. She walked to the bus stop with her hood up, exhaustion burning behind her eyes but something harder taking root beneath it, resolve. Across the city, Dwight Hardy was having a very different morning. He stood in his office, staring at a screen filled with reports from his cybersecurity team. Hardy Tech's system had flagged 3 unauthorized data transfers in 2 weeks, all traced to janitorial access points. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. So you're telling me someone's stealing confidential files using a cleaning crew badge? His head of security, Morgan Tate, nodded grimly. Yes, sir. It's odd. These breaches are too clean to be amateur work. Someone knows your network inside out. Dwight turned away from the window. And the badge belongs to one of the night janitors. Laura Hurst. He froze. The name landed with a thud. Run that again. She's part of the contract staff. Hired 6 months ago. Clean record. No prior security clearance. Dwight stared at the report. Something didn't fit. The woman he'd seen, fragile but composed, too careful for her own good, didn't strike him as a criminal. But he'd learned long ago that appearances were a language. Everyone hid something. He walked to his desk, tapping his fingers against the polished wood. Keep this quiet. If there's something bigger happening, I want it found before the board gets windy. Yes, sir. When Morgan left, Dwight lingered by the window. His reflection looked back at him, older than he remembered. He thought of the bruises on Laura's wrists, the fear in her eyes, the way she'd said it was just an accident. He didn't believe in accidents. Down in the maintenance wing, Laura sat in the break room with her laptop open on her knees. Her coworkers talked and laughed around her, but she barely heard them. She was tracing another transfer log, one that led to a location inside Hardy Tech itself. Her chest tightened. Someone on the inside was helping Evan. She clicked through more folders. Every file she opened deepened the hole. Corporate contracts, client negotiations, salary databases, all copied and stored in hidden caches. Whoever was behind this wasn't just stealing data. They were dismantling Hardy Tech from the inside. She copied everything onto her flash drive and closed the laptop as Miguel entered the room. "You okay?" he asked. "You look like you saw a ghost." "Just tired," she said with a small smile. "You work too much," he said, chuckling. "No one even notices half of what we do." "Maybe they should," she murmured. That night, she stayed later than usual. The building emptied floor by floor, until the only sounds were the hum of servers and the soft hiss of air vents. She moved through the corridors, gathering more pieces. Files left open on desks, documents still in printers. By 2 a.m., she had what looked like a timeline. Every major breach lined up neatly, each one tied back to her. She slipped out onto the terrace that overlooked the city. The glass railing glowed faintly from the streetlights below. The skyline shimmered, so clean, so bright, so untouchable. Hardy Tech stood like a monument to success, yet beneath it, corruption ran like rot through steel. She whispered to the night, her breath clouding the glass. "You used to scare me. Not anymore." Her reflection looked stronger somehow. She didn't know that on the top floor, just a few stories above, Dwight Hardy was staring down at the same city, thinking about her. He'd spent the evening rewatching security footage from the last 2 nights. And there she was, Laura, pushing her cart, moving floor to floor, calm, steady, and always near the restricted areas just before the breaches. The footage painted a picture, but Dwight didn't believe the story it told. Something else was happening. Something bigger than one janitor with bruises. He reached for his phone. "Morgan, pull the camera feeds from the data lab. 2 nights ago. And cross-check with any external logins linked to our subcontractors." "You think she's working with someone?" "I think she's the only one working," Dwight said quietly. He ended the call and glanced again at the city, unaware that below him, in a small locker room, the janitor he doubted was assembling proof of a crime his entire board would soon fear. That night, 2 people worked late inside Hardy Tech, one cleaning the mess, and one realizing how deep it went. Only one of them understood that the company's future now depended on a woman no one noticed. The call came just before dawn. "Ms. Hurst," Dwight's assistant said crisply over the intercom. "Mr. Hardy would like to see you in his office. Now." Laura froze, one hand gripping her mop handle. Around her, the empty floor gleamed, spotless under the sterile lights. For a moment, all she heard was the faint hum of the elevators. Then she straightened, brushed her uniform, and whispered to herself, "You knew this was coming." By the time she reached the top floor, her palms were damp. The doors slid open to reveal an office wrapped in glass and silence. Dwight Hardy stood by the window, the skyline behind him still shadowed in pre-dawn gray. He turned as she entered. "Ms. Hurst," he said evenly. "Please sit." She hesitated, glancing at the chair across from his desk, the same one she'd dusted countless times, the same one she never imagined sitting in. He motioned again. "Go on." She sat, folding her hands tightly in her lap. He studied her in silence for several seconds, his eyes sharp, unreadable. "I've reviewed some footage," he began. "You've been on restricted floors after hours, accessing areas outside your cleaning schedule, data labs, executive offices." Laura's throat tightened. He continued, "You understand how that looks, don't you? Especially after the recent security breaches traced to your ID." She didn't look up. "Yes, sir." He exhaled, pacing behind his desk. "You seem like a good person, but good intentions won't save you if there's evidence of misconduct. So before this goes further, I want you to tell me exactly what you've been doing at night." When he stopped, waiting for an answer, she finally met his gaze. Her voice was steady, quiet, but clear. "Before you ask, Mr. Hardy." She reached into her pocket and placed a small black flash drive on his desk. "Watch this." Dwight frowned. "What is it?" "Proof." He inserted the drive into his computer, clicked the file, and the screen filled with grainy surveillance footage. Two men, both in Hardy-Tech security uniforms, stood in a dimly lit parking lot beside an unmarked van. One handed the other a sealed envelope. Then, the camera zoomed on a tablet screen, showing encrypted client data transfers. At the bottom of the frame, a small identifier blinked. "User Hurstel_309. Dwight leaned forward. "That's your access ID." "Yes," she said quietly. "They're using me." He replayed the footage twice, his face hardening with each pass. "Who are they?" "Marcus Vale and Ethan Sloan. Both from internal security. They've been selling encrypted data to competitors for months, and they're using my badge to mask it." Dwight's jaw clenched. "And how exactly do you know this?" Laura's hand trembled slightly as she opened her folder and slid another document toward him. Printouts of transfer logs, timestamps, and routing numbers. "Because I've been watching them. For weeks." He stared at her. The janitor who swept floors and emptied trash was sitting across from him with more evidence than his entire cybersecurity division had managed to find. "Someone who used to work here," she continued, "taught them how to hide it. Evan Cross." Dwight's head snapped up. "Cross?" "Yes, sir. You fired him last year for misconduct." Dwight's memory sharpened. Evan Cross, the bright but volatile analyst who'd tried to manipulate internal systems for a personal project. A man who'd walked out of Hardy-Tech promising to burn the place down. "Why would Cross involve you?" he asked. She hesitated, then said softly, "Because he knows me. He was my ex." The silence that followed was thick, electric. Dwight sank back into his chair. "Your ex?" She nodded once. "He was controlling. Violent. When I left him, he promised I'd regret it. I didn't know then that he'd use my job for revenge." Dwight's face shifted, from disbelief to something colder. "Those bruises." Her eyes dropped. "He's been watching me again. Follow me. The texts started weeks ago. Then I realized what he was doing with my access. I tried to report it once. The police said there was no proof." For the first time, Dwight didn't see an employee. He saw a woman cornered by something far larger than herself, yet still standing tall. He turned back to the footage. "You said they've been selling data. To whom?" "Competitors. And Evan's company. Cross Security Solutions. He's using Hardy-Tech's own security network to route the files. It's why he targeted me. No one questions the janitor." Dwight let out a low, incredulous laugh. Not from amusement, but from fury. The irony. The man who once guarded our systems is dismantling them. "And using me as his ghost," she added. He studied her for a long moment. Her eyes held exhaustion, but beneath it, fire. The kind that burned quietly but never went out. Finally, he said, "You understand, if what you're saying is true, you've just placed yourself in serious danger. These people, Cross included, won't take kindly to being exposed." "I've already been living in danger," she said simply. "I'd rather face it head-on." He looked down at the flash drive again, then back at her. "Why come to me?" Her answer was immediate. Because you looked at me, Mr. Hardy. Everyone else just looked past me. The words hit harder than she intended. Dwight turned away, staring out the window. Outside, the city was waking up, early light spilling over glass towers built on ambition and silence. After a long pause, he said, "If I take this to the board without more proof, they'll bury it, and you. They protect themselves first." "I know. Then what's your plan?" She reached into her pocket again and slid another drive forward, smaller, encrypted. "This is a live feed from the lab servers. Tonight, they'll attempt another transfer. You'll see it happen." Dwight nodded slowly, his mind already racing. "And you're certain this cross is behind it?" She met his gaze squarely. "I'm certain he's never stopped being behind it." He exhaled long and deep. The weight of the truth pressed down on him. For years he'd prided himself on control, on knowing every corner of his empire. But now, the person revealing its cracks wasn't one of his executives or advisors. It was a woman the company hadn't even bothered to learn by name. "Ms. Hurst," he said quietly, "you're asking me to believe that my own people are selling out this company, that my systems have been compromised by a man we already removed, and that you, someone with no authority, have the evidence to prove it." "Yes." He studied her. No hesitation. No fear in her eyes now. Only certainty. Finally, Dwight reached over, pulled the drive from his computer, and handed it back to her. "Keep this somewhere safe. Don't speak to anyone about what you've told me. Not HR. Not security." Laura nodded, relief flickering in her chest. He stood. "If this is true, we'll need to be careful. We set a trap, let them walk right into it. But first, I need confirmation. I'll have my head of security cross-check your data quietly." "Mr. Hardy," she said softly, "with all due respect, if you go through your head of security, you'll be warning them." He froze. She continued, "Marcus Vale and Ethan Sloan both report to him. That's how they've stayed hidden." Dwight stared at her, realization dawning like lightning. He sat back down slowly, his voice low and grim. "Then I suppose we handle this ourselves." For the first time that morning, a small, grim smile touched her lips. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." The office fell silent again. Outside, the first rays of sunlight burned gold against the skyline. Dwight turned to her. "This is bigger than either of us, Ms. Hurst. But you've given me something I haven't felt in a long time. Clarity." "And what's that worth?" He smiled faintly. "Everything." She stood, smoothing her uniform. "Then I guess it's time we start cleaning house, sir." As she turned to leave, Dwight's voice stopped her. "Laura." She looked back. "For what it's worth." "I believe you." Her throat tightened, but she only nodded once and left. When the door closed, Dwight exhaled slowly, sinking into his chair. The city outside glittered in morning light, but for the first time, he saw the shadows inside his own empire. He picked up the phone, his voice calm but deadly precise. "Cancel all my morning meetings. We're going to find out just how deep this goes." And somewhere down the hall, the janitor everyone overlooked walked away with her head high, unaware that she'd just set the wheels of justice in motion. The following morning, Hardytech's skyline gleamed like armor under a cold winter sun. Dwight Hardy stood in his office, staring down at the city as if the glass walls around him had begun to crack. In truth, they had, just not the kind he could see. He'd spent years building this empire, one sleek tower of progress, innovation, and clean numbers at a time. But now, sitting across from him in the boardroom wasn't a consultant or executive. It was the woman who swept those towers clean. The one who had seen what he hadn't. Laura Hurst. Her navy uniform still carried faint traces of bleach and polish, but there was nothing faint about her eyes. They were steady, determined. "So," she said quietly, hands folded. "What's the plan?" Dwight looked around the table. Empty except for the two of them. "The plan," he said, "is to give them exactly what they want." He turned his laptop toward her. On the screen, lines of code streamed down in rapid sequence. A file labeled Project Vantage. Confidential prototype blinked at the top. The bait, he said. A synthetic data package created by my cyber team. Looks real enough to tempt any thief. Once they pull it, the trace will activate, routing back to their terminal and logging every credential. And you're sure they'll take it? Oh, they will, he said. Greed makes people predictable. Laura leaned in, studying the glowing file. And what happens when they do? Then, Dwight said, we close the trap. For a moment she said nothing. Then she nodded slowly. I'll keep doing my rounds. Like nothing's changed. Good, he replied. The less they suspect, the better. He paused before adding, but Laura, this could be dangerous. If they realize you're involved. She cut him off gently. Mr. Hardy, I've been living in danger for years. This is the first time it might actually lead somewhere. Dwight didn't answer. He only looked at her. Really looked. There was something about her calm defiance, the quiet way she stood her ground, that unsettled him. For the first time, he saw the company through her eyes. The invisible people who kept it running. The janitors, the cafeteria workers, the late-night staff no one thanked. The ones who saw everything and said nothing. Maybe that's why Hardy Tech had rotted under his nose. He'd built an empire of glass walls and soundproof doors, and never once thought to ask who was cleaning them. By that evening, the trap was live. Dwight's cyber team, 3 trusted analysts sworn to silence, deployed the fake file into the internal database. On paper, it looked like Hardy Tech's latest proprietary AI design, codenamed Vantage. In truth, it was an encrypted maze with a trace algorithm hidden beneath the surface. All that remained was patience. Laura continued her nightly routine. Mop bucket, gloves, quiet steps. To anyone watching, she was just the janitor again, moving through the corridors like a shadow. But every time she passed a security camera, she could feel the weight of the plan pressing behind her ribs. She wiped down the executive corridor, her reflection faint in the glass. Somewhere out there in the network, men were about to make their move. People like me don't get heard unless we scream, she whispered under her breath. But by then it's too late. Downstairs, in the dim glow of the control room, Dwight watched the live network feed. Each terminal flickered with streams of activity. Data pulses, logins, packet transfers. At exactly 11:42 p.m., a ping appeared. Unauthorized access detected. One of the analysts murmured. Dwight leaned forward. Where? Floor 17. Subnetwork routing through an internal proxy. Another voice. Trace initiated. They've bitten. Laura's voice came softly through the intercom. That's the data lab. Dwight glanced at the monitor showing hallway feeds. There she was, moving casually with her cleaning cart, glancing toward the sealed door of the lab. They're in, said the analyst. File extraction started. Dwight's pulse quickened. Keep tracing. Don't alert security yet. I want their entire chain. Laura moved closer to the door. From the small glass panel, she saw 2 men inside, their badges visible in the dim blue light. Marcus Vale and Ethan Sloan. One hovered over the terminal. The other kept watch near the servers. She could see the greed in their movements, the hurried way they copied files onto encrypted drives. Her earpiece buzzed softly. Dwight's voice. We've got them. IP trace is clean. Recording now. Laura whispered. Then it's working. Dwight didn't reply right away. He was watching her on the monitor, his expression unreadable. At that moment, he felt something shift. Respect. Not the polished boardroom kind, the real kind, born from seeing courage in its rawest form. This woman, his janitor, was standing 10 feet from the men sabotaging his empire. And she didn't flinch. When Marcus turned toward the window, Laura stepped back, pretending to dust a nearby cabinet. Her pulse hammered, but her hands stayed steady. After a tense minute, the door opened. The men brushed past her, barely noticing. She waited until they disappeared down the corridor before murmuring, "They're gone." In the control room, Dwight nodded to his team. "Seal the logs. Cross-reference their drives. I want every byte of data they touched." "Got it. We've got timestamps too. This is airtight." Dwight exhaled. Good. Send a copy to a secure folder, off the company servers. When the connection cut, he sat back, letting the weight of it sink in. They had them. Finally. Hours later, the building was nearly dark. Only a few lights glowed in the control room where Laura and Dwight sat side by side, reviewing the recorded data trails. The screens flickered with glowing threads of stolen information, each one leading straight back to cross-security solutions. It's all here, Dwight said. Transactions, transfer IDs, authentication logs. He built a network within my own company. Laura's voice was soft but steady. Evan doesn't build. He corrupts. He always has. Dwight looked at her profile in the glow of the monitors. Why didn't you leave when you realized? Where would I go? She said simply. He'd still find me. At least here I could fight back. He nodded slowly. You know, most people in your position would have stayed quiet. I did stay quiet, she said. For too long. The hum of servers filled the pause. Then she added, people like me don't get heard unless we scream. But by then it's too late. Dwight turned to her, the reflection of blue light in his eyes. Then maybe we make sure this time it's not too late. A faint smile tugged at her lips. You think one CEO and one janitor can fix an empire built on silence? No, he said. But it's a start. They sat there for a moment, two people from opposite worlds, connected by the same truth. Power meant nothing if it ignored the powerless. Then the terminal pinged again. Dwight's analyst's voice crackled through the line. Sir, we have something else. Cross just logged in remotely. He's accessing the same decoy file from an external address. Laura's stomach tightened. He's watching them. He knows it's working. Dwight straightened. Then we tighten the noose. I want to see exactly where he is. The trace began, numbers scrolling across the monitor, narrowing in on a signal. Location locked, the analyst said finally. He's using a satellite relay through an abandoned property, about 5 miles from HardyTech headquarters. Dwight's expression hardened. Perfect. He turned to Laura. When this is over, I want you to be safe. I'll have a car take you home. She shook her head. No. I'm seeing this through. You've done more than enough. Not until he's done, she said. Evan always liked unfinished stories. Let's make sure this one ends. For a long time, Dwight didn't argue. Then he nodded once, the faintest glimmer of admiration in his gaze. The control room hummed around them. Outside, the city lights shimmered, reflected in the glass like stars over deep water. And inside HardyTech, somewhere between power and vulnerability, two unlikely allies sat in silence, waiting for the next move in a game that had just turned deadly. The trap was no longer just a plan, it was alive. By dawn, HardyTech's skyline gleamed like glass armor under storm clouds. Inside, the hum of servers filled the silence of a company unaware it was about to be gutted from the inside out. The decoy file, Project Vantage confidential prototype, had been placed, encrypted, and activated. By noon it was bait. And by nightfall, it was a bleeding signal. Laura sat in the control room beside Dwight, her hands hovering over the terminal, eyes fixed on the blinking lines of data as they began to move. First slowly, then faster. It was like watching a heartbeat accelerate into panic. They've started, she whispered. Dwight stood behind her, arms crossed, gaze locked on the live trace monitor. The blue network lines glowed faintly against the dark screens, each one a thread connecting to an access point somewhere in the building. Where's it coming from? He asked. Internal, said one of Dwight's analysts. Subnetwork 23. East Wing. That's the data center. Laura's heart stuttered. That's my old section. Then, the terminal blinked again, and the trace stabilized. Dwight leaned forward. Do we have an ID on the user? The analyst's voice dropped. Yes, sir. He's logged in using elevated credentials. Cross_12. Laura's breath caught. Evan. Her ex had always been arrogant, but this, breaking into the company he'd once worked for, using his real credentials, wasn't arrogance. It was a message. Dwight's expression hardened. He's inside. Security protocols flashed red across the top of the screens. Unauthorized access detected. System integrity at risk. Lockdown protocol suggested. Dwight turned to the intercom. Initiate floor containment. Seal levels 20 through 24. I want real-time visuals. The command echoed through the control room like thunder. Laura's pulse drummed in her ears. He's not going for the data, she said. He's coming for me. Dwight looked at her sharply. What makes you say that? Because he's using my old login routes. He's not trying to steal anything new. He's trying to erase what I found. He wants to clear the trace before we can prove it's him. The analyst confirmed it. Sir, he's targeting the servers tied to Ms. Hurst's badge ID. He's trying to purge the access logs. Dwight's jaw tightened. Lock him out. We can't, another analyst said. He's bypassed the internal firewall. He must have embedded code before he left the company. He's rewriting the access permissions in real time. Dwight's tone dropped to a low growl. Then we shut down the system manually. No, wait, Laura said, standing. If you cut power now, the trace ends. We'll lose the proof, and him. Dwight hesitated. He's trapped in his own arrogance, she said. Let him keep thinking he's ahead. Her voice was calm, but Dwight saw the tremor beneath it, the battle between fear and fury. All right, he said. You're right. We let him dig his grave. But you stay here. Laura shook her head. If he's really inside, he's heading to the data floor. That's where I'll find him. Dwight stepped forward. Laura. I've faced him before, she said quietly. This time I'm not running. Before he could stop her, she grabbed her access card, tucked it into her pocket, and headed for the elevator. The security alarms pulsed red by the time Laura reached floor 23. The hallway was deserted. Rows of humming server towers cast thin shadows across the polished floor. The door to the data center was ajar. A single overhead light flickered, steady, then dim, then steady again. She pushed the door open. At the far end, a man stood bent over the central terminal. Tall, broad-shouldered, his reflection ghosting across the metal panels. Evan, she said, her voice cutting through the silence like glass. He froze, then turned slowly. Laura, he said, smiling faintly. Didn't think you'd be the welcoming committee. His voice still had that same smooth confidence that once made her believe him. Now it just felt poisonous. You shouldn't be here, she said. He chuckled. I built this place, sweetheart. I know every circuit, every flaw. You think I need permission to come home? Laura's fists clenched. Home? You mean the company you tried to bleed dry? Evan stepped closer, his eyes sharp and cold. I told them they'd regret letting me go. And now look, they've made their janitor the hero. What a joke. He stopped a few feet away from her. Tell me something, Laura. Did you really think hiding behind that mop would make you invisible to me? Her pulse pounded in her ears, but her voice stayed steady. I didn't hide. You just never looked down. Evan laughed softly. Always with the moral high ground. You haven't changed. She met his gaze. Neither have you. For a moment, the room was still except for the rhythmic hum of the servers. Then Evan's tone turned sharp. Where is it? She frowned. Where's what? The copy, he said. The drive you showed him. You think I don't know you gave Hardy evidence? You think he's the one who'll pay when this leaks? Laura took a step back, her mind spinning. He knew about the flash drive. He's not your problem anymore, she said. Oh, he's everyone's problem, Evan said. That man built his empire on secrets, and I'm about to auction them all. He turned back to the terminal, typing fast. Once I'm done, it's not just Hardy Tech that falls. It's his reputation, his investors, everything. And you, he glanced at her, eyes narrowing. You'll be the scapegoat. Again. The words hit her like a blade of déjà vu. But before she could speak, her earpiece crackled. Dwight's voice, tense but controlled. Laura stepped back. We have him on all feeds. Security's en route. Evan's head snapped up. You brought him here? Her hand brushed the small device clipped to her collar. You brought yourself. He lunged. The next seconds were chaos, a crash, a struggle, the metallic echo of fists colliding with steel. Laura ducked beneath his swing, backing toward the control console. Her hand fumbled for the emergency switch Dwight had told her about, the one no one but maintenance ever touched. Laura! Dwight's voice shouted in her ear. Trigger the lockdown now. Evan grabbed her wrist. Don't. He snarled. She looked at him, his fingers digging into her skin, the bruises that started all of this, and said quietly, You taught me fear. Then she slammed her hand down on the switch. A piercing alarm shrieked through the data center. Heavy blast doors began sliding shut. Red lights strobed across the walls. Evan spun, shouting, No, no, no. He bolted for the exit, but the doors sealed with a hydraulic hiss. He turned back, pounding his fists against the reinforced glass. You think this ends with me? He roared. Laura stood still, chest heaving, the alarm painting her in flashes of crimson and shadow. Yes, she said. It ends right here. Through the intercom, Dwight's calm voice broke through the sirens. Security, move in. Floor 23. Contain the suspect. Laura sank against the wall, shaking. When the guards arrived minutes later, Evan was still shouting threats, his voice muffled behind the sealed door. Dwight appeared soon after, flanked by two executives, his face unreadable. He looked at her first, the bruises on her arm, the steadiness in her eyes. You did it, he said quietly. No, she replied. We did. The sirens stopped. The air fell still. Dwight turned toward the trapped man behind the glass. We're not ruining anything, he said evenly. We're cleaning the house. Later that night, Laura stood by the window of the nearly empty control room, looking out at the city she'd once feared to walk through alone. The skyline blinked with cold light, but inside her, something finally settled. Her reflection stared back. Tired, bruised, but free. She touched her arm gently, whispering to the darkness. You used to scare me. Not anymore. The lights flickered like a dying pulse. Sparks danced from the server racks as alarms blared through the darkened data floor. The air smelled of ozone and burnt plastic, sharp and electric. Somewhere down the hall, glass shattered, then footsteps. Heavy. Furious. Laura froze. Her pulse thundered in her ears, but her feet refused to move. Then the door slammed open. Evan burst through it, his face twisted in rage, eyes wild with that same fever she remembered, the kind that had once left bruises on her skin and fear in her bones. You thought you could outsmart me, he spat, stalking toward her. You. Laura didn't move. She could feel the tremor in her hands, the instinct to run clawing at her, but she stood her ground. Her voice, when it came, was low and steady. You taught me fear, she said. Now you'll learn it. For a heartbeat, the world held still. Then he lunged. She pivoted, ducking past him, fingers slamming down on the bright red lever Dwight had told her about, the manual trigger for the fire safety lockdown. The response was instant. Metal barriers dropped with a hydraulic hiss, sealing every exit. The doors clanged shut behind Evan just as he turned, too late. What did you do? He roared, pounding his fists against the glass. Laura stumbled backward, gasping for breath, watching him rage inside the sealed room, a caged predator clawing at his own reflection. You think this makes you safe? He shouted. They'll come for you, Laura. You're nothing. You always were. She pressed a trembling hand against the control console. The glass vibrated under his blows, but it didn't break. No, she said quietly, voice shaking but firm. Not anymore. Behind the glass, Evan's reflection flickered in the pulsing red light. Wild, desperate, cornered. From the intercom above, Dwight's calm voice filled the chaos. Security, move in. Now. Within moments, armed guards stormed the corridor, their boots pounding in sync with the blaring sirens. They surrounded the sealed chamber, weapons raised. Evan kept shouting until the sound dissolved into something almost pathetic. Hoarse, broken rage. Dwight appeared on the upper balcony, his expression carved in steel. "End the lockdown," he ordered. The barriers lifted with a hiss, and the guards flooded in. Evan fought them, wild and flailing, but they took him down in seconds. One pressed a knee to his back as another read him his rights. Laura stood motionless as they dragged him past her. For the first time, his eyes met hers. Not with power, not with control, but with disbelief. "You think this changes anything?" He spat as they pulled him away. "You're still nothing." Laura didn't answer. She didn't need to, because she saw the reflection of herself in the glass. Not the woman he'd broken, but the one who had survived him. By dawn, HardyTech was no longer silent. News vans crowded the plaza, their antennas rising like thorns against the sunrise. Reporters shouted over each other, flashes bursting in rapid succession. Former employee arrested. Data leak traced to ex-security head. HardyTech insider scandal. Inside, Dwight stood in his office, watching the footage play across every major network. The same security tapes Laura had risked her life to record now filled every screen. Evan caught in the act, red-handed, face twisted in rage as he was dragged out of the data center. "This'll be all over the morning cycle," his PR head said quietly. "It's messy, sir." Dwight didn't take his eyes off the screen. Messy is better than rotten. He turned away, his gaze landing on Laura standing near the window, her hands clasped in front of her. She still wore her janitor's uniform, smudged from the night's chaos. "You did it," he said softly. Her eyes flickered to the news screens, Evan's face plastered across them, then to him. "We did it." He nodded once. "You know, the board's already trying to spin this. They'll call it a one-man breach. Pretend the system worked." Laura gave a small, tired smile. "Then maybe it's time someone told them what really happened." Dwight studied her, then said, "You've earned the right to do just that." Outside, the headlines rolled in waves. HardyTech janitor helps uncover corporate sabotage. Whistleblower employee prevents billion-dollar breach. Hero or insider. The woman who exposed the empire. The world was seeing her now, not as invisible labor, not as background, but as the reason HardyTech still stood. As the morning light spilled through the windows, Laura stepped closer to the glass, watching the city move below. Cars honking, people rushing, unaware of the silent wars fought in the spaces they never saw. Dwight joined her at the window. "You know," he said, his voice softer now, "I built this company believing numbers told the whole story. You reminded me that people do." She turned slightly toward him. "Then don't forget that again." "I won't." They stood there for a moment, neither speaking, just breathing in the quiet after the storm. Behind them, the TV anchor's voice cut through the hum. Sources confirm HardyTech's CEO personally authorized the sting operation that led to Cross's arrest. Company insiders say the whistleblower, an employee identified only as LH, risked her life to expose the corruption within. Laura looked at Dwight, a faint smile curving her lips. "They'll figure it out soon enough." "Let them," he said. "You earned your name back." Outside, the city's morning sun broke free of the clouds. Warm, golden, defiant. Inside, the woman no one noticed stood taller than the empire she'd just saved. The aftermath was chaos dressed in tailored suits. By Monday morning, HardyTech was a battlefield of flashing headlines and nervous shareholders. The building that once radiated quiet confidence now buzzed with fear. Phones rang non-stop. Reporters clustered outside the glass doors. Every screen glowed with the same story. HardyTech security scandal. CEO's reckless gamble exposes billion-dollar breach. The company's stock plunged 12% in a day. The boardroom, once Dwight's domain, turned into an ambush. "You've destroyed market confidence," barked Vincent Cole, CFO and snake in an Italian suit. "You should have gone through official channels instead of orchestrating a sideshow with custodial staff." Dwight stood at the head of the table, shoulders straight, voice calm. "That custodial staff is the reason HardyTech still exists." "You went rogue," another board member snapped. "We could have contained the story quietly. Instead, you invited a public spectacle. Investors are terrified." Dwight's jaw flexed, but he said nothing. Across the table, the legal counsel slid a folder toward him. "Mr. Hardy," she said delicately, "the board will convene this afternoon to discuss leadership transition. You understand the implications." He looked down at the paper. His possible removal, signed by people who'd smiled in his face for years. "I understand perfectly," he said. "You're about to make the same mistake I did." The room fell silent. He looked up, his gaze sharp. "You're so afraid of losing your grip that you can't see the truth. Hardy Tech was rotting long before the scandal. You just didn't want to notice the smell." The boardroom shifted uneasily. Dwight turned and walked out, leaving the silence behind him. Outside the tower, the story had already transformed. Someone, no one knew who, had sent an anonymous email to every major news outlet. The subject line read, "The Janitor Who Saved Hardy Tech." Inside was a detailed account of the breach, the corruption, and the woman who uncovered it all. It didn't name her directly, but the clues were enough. By noon, hashtags trended across social media. Hashtag the janitor hero and hashtag Laura saved Hardy Tech. Talk shows debated it. Business networks dissected it. For every headline about Dwight's recklessness, 10 more celebrated the unknown whistleblower who'd risked everything. When the reporters asked Dwight for comment outside the building, he said only, "She saved this company. I just gave her the floor to stand on." The clip went viral within hours. By evening, investors were flooding the PR lines with an entirely new message. Integrity sells. One prominent shareholder tweeted, "Hardy Tech didn't collapse, it evolved. Finally, a company that chose ethics over ego." The tide turned so fast it stunned the board. That night, their attempt to vote Dwight out was broadcast, leaked from inside the meeting room. The public saw executives squabbling while the man they blamed refused to defend himself. By dawn, opinion pieces called Dwight's move the most ethical act in corporate history. The same investors who'd panicked 24 hours earlier now demanded his reinstatement. Meanwhile, Laura kept her head down. Every morning she still showed up early, mop and gloves in hand. But now people stopped her in the hallways. They whispered thank yous. They smiled. For the first time she felt seen. Her face wasn't on the news, but her story was. And somehow that was enough. Late one evening, Dwight found her in the break room, alone, watching the city lights through the window. "You could take credit, you know," he said softly. "People deserve to know your name." She shook her head. "They already know enough. I didn't do it for attention." "Then why?" She turned, eyes reflecting the skyline. "Because I was tired of being afraid. And tired of watching good people stay silent." Dwight smiled faintly. "You changed more than this company, Laura. You changed me." She shrugged. "Then I guess we're even." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the noise of a city that had begun to believe in second chances again. Inside, the man at the top and the woman from the bottom stood on the same floor at last. Equals in truth, partners in redemption. The weeks that followed felt like a different lifetime. The headlines had faded, the lawsuits were settling, and the company that once stood on shaky ground was learning how to walk with integrity again. Hardy Tech, reborn under new policies and transparency audits, was no longer just a corporation. It was a symbol of reform. And at the heart of it stood the woman no one used to see. Laura Hurst walked through the gleaming lobby, no longer in janitor's blues but in a crisp blazer with a small nameplate that read, Director of Employee Ethics and Safety. The same badge that once gave her access to empty hallways now opened doors to boardrooms. People nodded to her as she passed, not out of obligation but respect. When she reached Dwight Hardy's office, the door was already open. He stood by the window, hands in his pockets, looking out over the city that shimmered like a sea of light. "Come in," he said, turning with a smile. "I was just watching the sunrise. Feels different these days." She stepped in, her footsteps soft against the polished floor. "Different how?" "Cleaner," he said with a small laugh. "And quieter. Maybe that's your doing." Laura smiled faintly. "Or maybe people finally stopped pretending not to notice what's right in front of them." He nodded. "I read the new whistleblower proposal you drafted. It's good, no, it's necessary. You're giving this place a voice again. I'm giving people a voice, she corrected gently. That's what was missing. Dwight studied her for a long moment. In her eyes, he saw the same strength that had once terrified the guilty, but now it inspired the broken. You know, he said quietly, they're calling you the woman who changed Hardy Tech. Laura laughed softly. The city loves its titles. They're not wrong, he said. You didn't just save this company, Laura. You reminded it what a soul looks like. Her gaze dropped to her sleeve. For a moment she hesitated, then slowly rolled it back, revealing faint, healed scars where bruises once bloomed. She traced one lightly, not with shame, but remembrance. Then maybe, she said softly, those bruises finally meant something. The room fell still. Dwight turned back to the window, voice low. You know, when this started, I thought I was the one protecting you. And he smiled. Turns out, you were protecting all of us. For a while, they stood in companionable silence. Two survivors of different wars, watching a city that had learned something about decency the hard way. Finally, Dwight said, we're holding a press briefing tomorrow. Investors want a statement about the new direction. I'd like you to stand beside me. Laura shook her head with a quiet smile. No, sir. You're the face of Hardy Tech. I'm just the reminder. The reminder of what? She met his eyes. That greatness means nothing if it forgets its humanity. Dwight's smile deepened, the kind that came from real humility. Then you'll always have a place here, whether you want the title or not. Laura nodded, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Thank you, Mr. Hardy. Dwight, he corrected. Call me Dwight. She smiled. All right, Dwight. As she turned to leave, the morning sun poured through the glass, casting long golden lines across the corridor. The same path she used to sweep every night now gleamed beneath her steps. Outside, employees moved through the halls, talking, laughing, living without fear. For the first time, Hardy Tech didn't feel like a tower of power. It felt alive. Laura walked slowly, her reflection following beside her. Not the invisible janitor, not the broken woman, but someone who had earned her place in the light. At the end of the corridor she paused, taking one last look back at the skyline. Then she whispered, almost to herself, you can't erase the past, but you can build something better from it. And with that she walked forward, steady, strong, unafraid. The janitor had become the moral heartbeat of an empire.